Good morning. It's lovely to be back in Bournemouth. It was actually here on this very stage where I had one of my most formative moments as a Liberal Democrat member. It was back in 2001 and the party was having a debate on the issue of all-woman shortlists, always a lively one. Speaking in favour was one of my all-time political heroes, Shirley Williams. And speaking against was 21-year-old me. Before my speech, I was just a mess of nervous energy. So all I could think of to do to calm myself down was to run up that hill outside. And I turned up to speak in the debate, still slightly glowing with sweat. And in a couple of months' time, the Liberal Democrats will be back here in Bournemouth for our conference, and I hope that this time I'll be taken to the stage as leader of the Liberal Democrats. I am so honoured to be here to address some of the hardest working elected representatives in our country. Day in, day out, you dedicate yourselves to your local communities. You make sure that our streets are safe, our air is clean, our elderly relatives are looked after, and our most vulnerable have a roof over their head. You do an amazing job, and I know just now how much harder it's getting. The government is asking you to do more and more, and giving you less and less to do it with. And there's still no sign of the spending review. The longer we wait for the government to get its act together on this, the harder it is for councils up and down the country to plan properly. With their indecision and delay, they're making what is already a difficult task ever more challenging. Funding for local government has been a political football. When Labour were in power, the Conservatives claimed that local government funding was unfairly neglecting rural councils. Then Labour complained that the cuts were unfairly impacting cities and northern councils. So when it comes to local government funding, fairness is very much in the eye of the beholder. The Liberal Democrats are clear what local government means to us. We believe that it is in local communities where people can come together most successfully to work with each other for the good of society and to achieve their own potential. And we believe that local authorities are vital to enable our communities to grow, bond and thrive. And in doing so, enable every single individual to access the opportunities they want, to feel safe and to lead healthy and happy lives. For this Conservative government, devolution is about passing the buck for everything they don't want to do. For us, devolution is about empowering people and their communities to make the right decisions about their local area and local public services. Because there is no one who knows what works in the local area better than the very people who live it day in and day out. It's the only way place shaping can work. So the Liberal Democrats in government will lead a devolution revolution. Let me tell you what that means. New parish councils, town councils, and neighbourhood forums where communities want them. More powers for principal local authorities over education, health and social care, transport, planning, housing and the environment. A new tier of democratically elected devolved authorities across England, replacing the mayoral model that concentrates too much power in the hands of one person. And it means more openness and accountability for local decision-making, webcasting council meetings, citizens' juries where members of the public inform council policy on crucial issues. More powers for opposition councillors to scrutinise finances and be consulted on decisions that affect their ward. But the devolution revolution only works if councils are properly representative of the communities they serve. Let's start by introducing single transferable vote in local elections. It'll make them more competitive and challenge those who are complacent because they feel they're in safe seats. We use it in Scotland, and since it was introduced, the number of uncontested seats has gone from 67 in 2003 down to just 3 in 2017. And let's support the use of all women and all disabled shortlists and legislate so we can also have all Black, Asian and minority ethnic shortlists too. Yes, Shirley Williams eventually won me round on using shortlists. The strength of a council comes from how well it knows and understands every bit of the local area and every community within it. So we must make it easier for more people to stand for council and to be elected too. My challenge to each and every one of you here today is to think of someone who would make an amazing councillor, but would never themselves think that someone like them could be one, and ask them to stand. In fact, I want you right now to think about that person. It could be anyone, an active and engaged parent on a school governing body, maybe the leader of a residents' association, someone who's founded an amazing local charity. You know who they are, you know they have the potential, and you know you should ask them. And once you've got a name in your mind, I want you to be ready to send them a simple message by the end of my speech. Just something like, have you ever thought of standing for council? You would be excellent. Don't underestimate the power of this kind of approach, particularly from someone who is already an elected representative or senior in local government. The worst case scenario is that you give someone a boost. And at best, you bring new people on board. And it's vitally important because diversity in our councils isn't a nice to do, it's a must have. Now, I said earlier that being a councillor today is a hugely difficult undertaking. Not only are you having to deal with the uncertainty that Brexit brings to your local economies and the anxieties that it's causing to your local communities, but you're also having to cope with the impact that Brexit is having on all other government business. Our country and our local authorities are facing huge challenges, whether it's knife crime, the climate emergency, our ageing population, or homelessness. And what is Parliament doing? Nothing. A couple of months ago, I was taken around Hackney by Pauline Pearce. Pauline is a local community champion. Some of you might recognise her as the Hackney heroine, the fearless woman who stood up to the rioters in London back in 2011. She took me to the place where a 15-year-old had been stabbed to death. A shrine of photographs of his childhood, messages, flowers, a skateboard, a can of his favourite fizzy drink. Tashawn was clearly a wonderful, much-loved boy. And while we were paying our respects at his memorial, some of his friends arrived on their daily visit. And it was just heartbreaking to hear their stories about Tashawn, how he was always helping others, how much they loved him and missed him. They were off school because of their GCSE revision. Those teenagers should have been facing nothing worse than normal exam nerves. Instead, they were mourning their friend, dealing with trauma. Knife crime isn't just a London problem. It's taking young lives in Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, right across our country. And it's not just a big city problem. It's spreading fear right across our communities, with more and more children being enticed into gangs and exploited by drug traffickers. We are failing our young people. We need immediate action nationally to ensure that local communities have the resources they need to tackle knife crime. And it can be done. My constituency, East Dunbartonshire, is just north of Glasgow, which, when I was first elected in 2005, was known as Europe's murder capital. 39 people were killed in the city that year. Since then, the murder rate has dropped by 70%. Glasgow decided to take a public health approach to knife crime. So as well as dealing with the obvious physical consequences of knife crime, the authorities started to treat violent behaviour itself as an epidemic that spreads across a community. John Carnochan and Karen McCluskey, inspiring individuals, set up the Violence Reduction Unit, which works with schools, hospitals and job centres to tackle violence. For example, The A&E department at Glasgow Royal Infirmary has navigators who engage with patients who've been affected by violence and help them get the support they need to break that cycle of violence. In England, the charity Red Thread has pioneered a similar model, with specially trained youth workers in major trauma centres to intervene with young people at teachable moments. That started in London, and they've recently spread to Nottingham and Birmingham, and I'd like to see the government invest to replicate their success elsewhere too. But the fundamental change we need is for government to recognise that without adequate youth services in our communities, this is a battle we are not going to win. Young people need space. They need safe spaces that they can go to and where they can not only meet friends and peers, but also access support from youth workers during these formative and often challenging years. Just last month, I was down in Saltash in Cornwall, where an amazing local charity, Livewire, is using music to help young people get through their teenage years and into adulthood. And they couple music with mental health support too. Making these youth services available should be a statutory duty for local authorities, and the Liberal Democrats will provide the necessary funding to inject life back into our youth services and re-establish youth workers as a vital link between young people and their communities. But this isn't just about passing laws and imposing yet another statutory duty. We have a moral duty to protect our young people, and every time one dies on our streets or takes their own life, we are failing. This must stop. The government is also asleep at the wheel when it comes to tackling the climate emergency. We have just over 11 years to save the planet. Let that sink in. 11 years. We, all of us in this room, are the last generation that can take significant action to stop irreversible climate change. We are the last generation that can save our planet. And if we fail to keep global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, that will make droughts, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of more people more likely. If we fail, will we be able to look our children in the eye? Just this week, we've seen record temperatures in France, the worst wildfires in Catalonia for 20 years, and earlier this year, we had wildfires in Yorkshire, flash flooding in Edinburgh and Stirling just a couple of weeks ago. And Wainfleet, a town in Lincolnshire, had to be evacuated after the equivalent of 2 months' rain fell in just 2 days. Earlier this year, the Environment Agency warned that if global temperatures continue to rise at the rate they are now, we need to spend £1 billion a year to make sure our homes are properly flood-proof. And at the same time, our natural world is being destroyed at a rate of tens to hundreds of times higher than the average over the past 10 million years. 1 million species are at risk of extinction. This devastating loss of biodiversity is putting human society in grave danger. So while the government continues to while away its time trying to figure out how to best damage our economy with Brexit, we are running down the clock on saving our planet. But in these rather bleak times, our young people have been a huge source of inspiration and marvel. Greta Thunberg has taught us all what being an influencer really means. Her school strike has inspired hundreds of thousands of other young people around the world and around the UK to stand up and say, we need action, and we need it now. Extinction Rebellion have brought new energy to this issue too. I went along with my 5-year-old son to the rebellion at Marble Arch. It was the politest protest I've ever been to, with such a positive focus on what constructively we can do to meet the scale and urgency of the challenge we face. It is so important that children and young people are at the centre of this debate. After all, it's their future. Back in May, the UK Parliament became the first in the world to declare a climate emergency. But Westminster was certainly not the first in the UK. Councils up and down the country have been doing it since last November, soon after the IPCC report was released, setting out the small amount of time we have left to act. And councils are leading the way on action too. In Watford, Lib Dem Mayor Peter Taylor will be introducing an on-demand bus service that works with an app, an Uber for buses, if you will. In Sutton, Lib Dems led by Ruth Dombey are doing similar with their Go Sutton bus scheme. In Bedford, another Liberal Democrat mayor, Dave Hodgson, has overseen a 63% reduction in the council's emissions since 2011, thanks to ambitious green projects such as installing solar panels on the roofs of village halls, building a hydropower facility on the Great Ouse, and replacing inefficient streetlights with LEDs. York City Council, where the Lib Dems are in power with the Green Party, was the first in the country to commit to introduce a voluntary clean air zone by January of next year. South Lakeland, also run by the Lib Dems, reuses or recycles about 70% of bulky household waste and uses social media to disseminate top recycling tips. And in Cornwall, where the Lib Dems work with local independent councillors, they are undertaking a large geothermal energy project, the first of its kind in the UK. Councillors up and down the country are showing the government that it can be done, that you can take bold action on the climate emergency and see results. And just as you have taken the lead on tackling the climate emergency, you have also filled the void the government has left on the social care crisis in our country. Yet again, the government has kicked the green paper on the future of social care down the road. 5 times it has been delayed. 5 times the government has decided it had better things to worry about than how we take care of some of the most vulnerable people in our country. But the ageing time bomb doesn't wait. The fastest growing age group in our country in the next 2 decades is in the 65 plus group. If we continue to ignore this, our parents and grandparents will suffer. I believe that everyone deserves to grow old with dignity, able to access the care and support they need to lead fulfilling lives in their twilight years. And I want to thank the many local authorities who are going the extra mile in these difficult times to take care of our ageing relatives. In Sutton, for example, they employ specialist Admiral nurses who provide support to people living with dementia and their families so they can continue to live independent lives in their own homes. A resident whose father had been diagnosed with dementia wrote to the council to praise their work. They said, "Without these nurses, who have been practical, compassionate, dedicated and knowledgeable, I think we'd have been all at sea for ages. They have helped with so many issues, from emotional to practical, getting solutions in place quickly and effectively." But we need to do so much more. And I want to thank the LGA for stepping in, conducting your own consultation and publishing a green paper on the future of adult social care and well-being. This social care crisis is on the scale of the health crisis the country saw during the Second World War. Back then, Beveridge set out the blueprint for our beloved NHS, and Bevan delivered it in the years after the war, together delivering a new deal for healthcare in our country. Today, we need a new deal for social care to bring hope to millions in our society who are in ever more need of help. And as the LGA has made perfectly clear, that means more funding. The Liberal Democrats have called for Parliament to work across parties to fix our broken social care system, and I challenge the future leader of the Conservative Party and our future Prime Minister to commit to create a cross-party working group to find the answers we need and build on the work already done by the LGA. We must take the politics out of caring for our parents and grandparents. The final great challenge I want to highlight is homelessness. The fact that thousands of people sleep rough every night shames our whole country. At last count, it was 4,700 people, but that doesn't even capture the hidden homeless in insecure and unsuitable accommodation. The total is more like 320,000 homeless people, and hundreds of them die each year. We need to build more homes, of course we do, not just to tackle rough sleeping, but to make sure everyone can afford to buy or rent a decent home. And I'm glad that after years of campaigning by the Lib Dems and the LGA, the government has finally agreed to lift the cap on how much councils can borrow to build new homes. And I'm glad to have seen councils across the country pledge to take up this new power to build thousands more affordable homes. But even then, we're still not building nearly enough. The average over the past 3 years has been 190,000 new homes a year, well short of the 300,000 a year the government says we need. We urgently need to step it up a gear. That's why the Liberal Democrats are proposing a non-profit British housing company, which would use compulsory acquisition to buy low-cost land and build affordable homes on it. We also need to stop Brexit. 1 in 10 of our construction workers are from elsewhere in Europe. 84,000 EU citizens exercising their free movement rights to live and work in the UK. If we end free movement, as Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, and Jeremy Corbyn all plan to do, if we tell these European builders they're no longer welcome, who will build the 300,000 homes a year that we need? But building homes isn't the whole answer, because homelessness is not just a housing crisis, it's a social crisis. We must address the reasons that people find themselves on the street in the first place, whether that means providing treatment for mental ill health or drug and alcohol addiction, extra support for people leaving care or prison, or refuges for those escaping domestic violence. And we also need to invest in the things that help people get back into good, healthy routines, learning to cook, finding work, volunteering, going to college. As with knife crime, this requires a whole range of organisations, local authorities, the NHS, the voluntary sector, and others, to work together in partnership. The government has recognised some of this need in the Homelessness Reduction Act, but once again, you can't just put more and more statutory obligations on local authorities without giving them the money to do the job. Solving the homelessness crisis is a mammoth task, and I won't pretend to have all the answers today. But I hope we can all agree that one approach is not the solution. The idea that people choose to be homeless and deserve to be punished for it is frankly repugnant. Yet the government is still prosecuting and convicting 1,000 people a year under the Vagrancy Act, a 195-year-old piece of legislation that makes it a crime just to sleep rough or beg on the streets. It's so heartless, so counterproductive, that it's scarcely believable. Homelessness isn't something you can disincentivise with the threat of prosecution. All it does is make it harder for people to get the help and support they need. That's why I'm backing my friend and colleague Layla Moran's bill to repeal the Vagrancy Act, a change that is nearly 2 centuries overdue. We cannot criminalise our way out of homelessness. For the last 3 years, our country has been in a state of flux. Whether you voted to stay in the EU or to leave, we can all agree that the uncertainty is not doing anyone any good. And regardless of whether it's Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson as our new Prime Minister, we know that a no-deal Brexit has become more probable. That means billions of pounds being wasted on preparing our country for something that even the government's own analysis has said will be disastrous for our economy and our communities. It means civil service time and resource directed away from the biggest challenges that we're facing: the climate emergency, our ageing population, the future for our young people. It means business holding back on investment, on recruitment, and wasting their ingenuity on planning for crisis scenarios on our supply chains. And for our councils, it means yet more delay on the spending review, on the green paper for adult social care, and on all of the other decisions that will help you to do more for your communities. The Liberal Democrats have been crystal clear on Brexit. We believe that our children and grandchildren deserve better than Brexit Britain. We want to stop Brexit because we believe that we are better off in Europe. We believe that by being a member of the European Union, we can build a richer, greener, safer future. With Trump to the west and Putin to the east, we believe that this is not the time to turn our back on our closest friends, on those who, like us, believe in fighting for open, inclusive and liberal societies. If I'm elected leader of the Liberal Democrats, I will do whatever it takes to stop Brexit. I'll work with whoever shares that goal, because by joining forces, we can secure a people's vote, and together we can once again restore our country on a better path. And the Liberal Democrats in government will deliver for our local communities. We will oversee a devolution revolution to empower you and others to do more and make better decisions for your local areas. We believe that decisions about policies and spending should be made at the lowest possible level of government. That's how you can best ensure the right decisions are made for every community. We believe that local government is the backbone to our society, and one of the biggest tasks ahead for local government is to bring our communities together again. At this time of great division in our country, I believe it is through working in every community that we can begin to bridge the divide. And you're crucial to that, because you can create the shared experience and the shared understanding. You can create the space we need in our communities for people to come together and debate and discuss what they want in their lives, for themselves and for their children. The space we need as a country to relearn the art of disagreeing well with one another and to work through our differences in search of what we do agree on and what we can work together on to make our communities better. So that's my plea to you today. Create the space for people to find common ground. Bring together people in local communities. Help heal our divided country. And thank you for having me here. It really is an honour. Thank you for all you do, day in, day out, against all manner of challenges, bearing up in hugely uncertain times. Thank you for working so hard to make our communities better places in which to live, work, learn, grow up, and grow old. Thank you.